some of the people send me a lot of podcasts and things like that. But it was just really fascinating how they started out 10 years ago, and they've reduced coal plants in our country by 60%, and they're in line to do all 100% by 2030, which, I mean, literally that's
that's tomorrow practically.
I know, but they talked about social justice and the fact that I think he said 68% of people of color live near a coal plant of some sort in our country and suffer a lot of medical conditions because of it, and that how unfair. And so changing to solar or renewable energies will help improve the health of people in our country and reduce medical costs, and that no one's been calculating that when they've talked about different kinds of energy. So found it fascinating. Anyway.
Mayor, we just got our solar panels installed last week on our house.
That's fabulous. Yeah. Oh my.
It's been a life goal. It's been a life goal. So I'm
glad. Me too, but I've been turned down 3 times. They keep saying, you have too many trees. I'm like, I want the trees. I don't know what to do.
The trees are good though. The trees are good. You want that.
No, I know, but
yeah.
So did you get the photovoltaics or the water heating ones?
We got the full Monty, the photovoltaics, but Duke Energy or whatever we have, Dominion Energy hasn't installed the net meters yet. So we're still using our power in real time. And then when they install the net meters later next week, then we'll actually feed back into the system, and really probably you get almost 100% of our electrical power from solar, which is great.
That is really great.
Because we have a pretty big house. So it's, I mean, a lot of volume. So it's good. We feel good about it.
You should feel good about it. It's great.
I wish everybody.
So I guess Musk, I think they're on the market, is now marketing roofing shingles that are photovoltaic.
Yeah, they're not installing them in NC yet.
But then the next logical step will be to make trees that are photovoltaic, and then you don't have to worry about having too many trees.
They already are.
With genetic modifications, you just, put in a gene for photovoltaic into the trees and you're good to go.
All right, we're 1 minute, folks. Welcome, Alan's coming in. I like how it rings a doorbell. You think you'd have a different sound for coming online versus to your front door. So we're missing Jess and Karen and Hong Bin. Michael, do you want to text them, please? Make sure they're coming.
Well, it's only 6:29. I wonder if people.
There's Karen. There's Karen.
Wonder if people think it's at 7.
I know. So just if you'll send them a reminder, thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello. Welcome. Hello, Karen. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm getting a countdown here. All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 21st, 2020 Chapel Hill Town Council work session. This evening, we have 3 items on our agenda. We're going to get a progress report on the Climate Action Plan. We're going to continue our discussion of state mandated changes to our land use management ordinance under the Chapter 160D. I know it's riveting. There we go. And we're going to have a discussion of process for developing council-initiated resolutions. And a friendly reminder to council, we have a closed session after this meeting. You'll have to log out and log back into the link that Amy Harvey has sent out to you after this. I do have a few announcements to share. They're very short here, but today Governor Cooper extended phase 3. We know that our numbers around the state have been actually climbing and our hospitalizations have gone up. And because of the trend upwards of that and our positivity rate, North Carolina is going to remain in phase 3 for the next 3 weeks. I will say Orange County did a good job. We did not receive the letter from the health department because our positivity rate and our numbers have held steady. We've gone up a little bit actually, but we're still right at the 3% or a little bit less. But there's other counties in North Carolina that are way over the 5%. So the governor talked about social gatherings remain a contributing factor. And with Halloween just 10 days away, want to remind everybody about celebrating differently this year. Halloween will be different this year across the country, but especially in Chapel Hill. And we want people to observe the 3 W's if you're going out to trick or treat or be outside at Halloween. Wear your mask, stand 6 feet apart, wash your hands frequently. But we're sending out a video this week. The chancellor and the health director and I we have a video going out to everyone to talk about it's going to be different this year. And we aren't closing the streets downtown Chapel Hill. So we want people to find other ways to celebrate Halloween. And we want to keep our numbers low. So that's coming out. I wanted to share an exciting thing that happened earlier this month. We learned that Innovate Carolina received a $230,000 grant from Leemore Capital Company to expand programming at our Launch Business Accelerator. So that was a great infusion of money to launch. It'll enable Launch to invest in software and technology for the offices, expand the startup support services, and hire a community manager to provide more local support, reach back out to alumni of Launch, pull people together. We're really, really excited to have these funds to do some of the things we need to do to take us to the next level. And so we're want to say thank you to Leemore Capital for investing in Chapel Hill and the Launch Accelerator. So that's really cool. Okay. Public input is important to us, but tonight is a work session, so we reserve a few minutes when we have time at the end of the meeting for public comment. And I'll remind folks that we always welcome your emails and phone calls, and we try to return them as soon as possible, but we will try to reserve the last 10 minutes of the meeting for anyone that has a brief public comment at the end. So that's all right. In keeping with the state statutes in our virtual world, we're going to have a roll call for attendance. We don't vote at work sessions, so hopefully I won't be doing a roll call again. But tonight we need to do a roll call to make sure. And if you will unmute yourself and say aye when I call out your name, that would be appreciated. Mayor Pro Tem Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Jess Anderson. Councilmember Alan Boyncey.
Here.
Councilmember Hong Bin Gu.
Here.
Councilmember Tai Nguyen.
Present.
Councilmember Amy Ryan.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Stegman.
Here.
And the mayor is also here. We will hope Ms. Anderson will join us shortly. Okay. So that brings us to our first item on the agenda. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure which one is first, the climate action or the 160D. I
believe it's climate action, Mayor.
Great. Take us away, Mr. Richardson. Sorry, I didn't get the agenda and it's hard to take the screen away to find it. So thank you.
No problem. Are you all seeing the presentation?
We are.
Okay, great. Well, good evening. My name is John Richardson. I serve as your Community Resilience Officer, and the item before you, as the mayor just said, is a progress report on the town's climate action plan. Let's see. All right. Is the slide advancing? Looks like it was held up there for a second.
It's advancing.
Okay, great. When we first spoke with you all about this project several months ago, it was clear that the council was concerned about the urgency for action, and at the same time that we're creating this plan. And so for that reason, we've continued to take action while compiling the data and the input we need to build the plan. So I hope that comes through in tonight's presentation. So three main areas that I'd like to cover this evening. The first is on key findings. The second is, as I mentioned, some progress on other climate action that we've been doing over the last several months. And the third is on next steps to wrapping up the plan and then moving forward with implementation. The recommendation, as you see here on this slide, is that the council receive our report and that y'all provide us with any additional direction. Maybe to say that a different way, we're here to share and to make sure we're on the right track. So this first section about key findings, this is data that our consultant developed. So that's what I'm about to show you. This is information about the two inventories they did, our community inventory and our town operations inventory. They also helped us with some modeling for high impact carbon reduction strategies. So the things that will do the most good. So we'll show you some of that as well. And then this information will be published, I just want to mention that, and shared along with the draft plan in early November. Okay, so this first slide is about community emissions, and the key take home here is, again, that the town makes up about 2% of the total annual carbon emissions in Chapel Hill. The other 98%, as you can see on the slide, is community emissions. And so this really points to, as we've been saying, it points to the importance of collective action as we move forward. This slide is talking about our own emissions from town operations. And those, as you can see, primarily come from our vehicle fleet and our buildings, as well as some commuting, followed by streetlights and traffic lights. And so the community emissions sector, if we break that down, it looks somewhat similar, although buildings are on top and transportation is the second leading source of emissions. This slide is talking about carbon intensity and comparing Chapel Hill with different cities around the country. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer to the bottom of the slide so that you can see that information more clearly. You can think of this as the average person's carbon footprint in each city. And so as we're comparing ourselves to regional and more urbanized cities, Chapel Hill is doing fairly well. I also just want to point out that we did give some additional information in response to a council question, which showed some comparisons to other college towns of similar sizes. And I'd be happy to talk about that tonight if you're interested. This is looking forward. This is an emissions forecast that shows two possible future scenarios. The dark blue line is what we call business as usual. So that top dark blue line is considering things like continued population growth, current climate actions that we are taking today, as well as sort of anticipated efficiency gains with things like vehicles and appliances. So as this line ticks upward from 2017 to 2050, the reason this is happening is that even with relative efficiencies and modest growth, our carbon footprint will grow over time if we stay where we are, so to speak, with our climate action. So it points to the fact that we need to do more. The light blue line, which is the bottom line trending downward, is what we estimate our projections to be, or excuse me, what we project our emissions to be with plan implementation. So this is showing what we can achieve by taking the actions outlined in our carbon modeling, which, as I said a minute ago, is a downward trend in emissions. And these data also tell us that the town's community emissions levels have dropped about 33% from 2005 to 2017. So if we continue on the light blue line, Chapel Hill will be well positioned to meet the council's 2025 goal, which is a 26 to 28% emissions reduction. And the reason this is significant is that this would help the town satisfy its pledge to do Chapel Hill's part to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement. So we're on a good trajectory. So what actions will lower emissions the most? So we've taken the consultants' modeling data, as I mentioned before, we've compiled them into what we're calling top climate action categories. And within each category, there are existing actions that we need to elevate, and I'll talk about that. We also have some new actions that we need to begin to take. Okay, so the first action is greening the grid. So this is about working towards a cleaner, greener electricity grid. That's modeled at a 38% reduction by 2050. The next action is what we're calling sustainable development. That's modeled at a 14% reduction. This is carbon neutral construction. So think of this as carbon neutral new construction that is also walkable, bikeable, and served by transit. The third action category with an 11% modeled reduction is electric vehicle charging. So this is a network that supports what we're seeing as an existing trend in our community, more and more EV adoption, which also includes more electrification of our own vehicles within the town's fleet. And the fourth category here with an 8% modeled reduction is what we're calling green building retrofits, which is this is retrofitting our own existing buildings, both the towns and the buildings within the community with a focus on phasing out natural gas and moving towards all electric, as well as energy efficiency. So what I'm going to do now is go into a little bit more detail about each of these. Okay, so with greening the grid, the town does not have control over the electrons that are on the grid. So this is first and foremost a challenge that many cities face, especially those like us that, where we do not own and operate our own power plant. But at the same time, this is the biggest play, so to speak, and it can have the most positive ripple effects on the other action categories. So an example of an action that we can take, and one we don't often talk about, but one that I think will be important as we go forward, is advocacy. So this could be lending a voice, maybe with other cities and counties, to push our utilities as they work to meet their reduction targets, which are shown in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And the good thing is we are seeing more and more utilities, Duke and Dominion, have come out and said that they are working towards net zero emissions by 2050. Another important action category included in this could be something like community scale solar. So this would be working within the options available to us through the state to create large utility scale investments in renewable energy like solar. And I can talk more about that if you're interested. So for the second category, an example of an action and a target would be what we're sort of calling the Council's Energy Policy 2.0. So here, policy is referring to a combination of actions that includes incentives and regulations to drive towards new development that is net zero emissions by 2030, which is the target you see in the bottom right corner of the screen. This also matches up with the town's standard for its own buildings, which this council set a couple of years ago, which is the AIA 2030 challenge. So this matches up nicely with what we're trying to do for our own facilities. Another action category here, again, is to continue planning for walkable, transit-served, bikeable neighborhoods. And so we have, of course, the Future Land Use Map project and the upcoming LUMO rewrite that both help us to create the vision and the rules for moving Chapel Hill towards sustainable, low-carbon patterns of development. All right, third category. An example here is the deployment of more electric vehicle charging stations to create a network. So again, this looks like our efforts to help support a trend that we're seeing in the community and provide the infrastructure needed to support that trend. And you can see the targets down below. This could be, we've modeled a number of level 2 and level 3 charger investments, as you can see in the bottom right. And this would be a rollout over the next 30 years. We've also estimated this cost for the town at about 4.1 million over that 30-year period. That's for public stations and about close to 2 million for private stations. Another action that we want to highlight, of course, is that we would do the same thing for our own fleet. So we would continue looking to convert vehicles, specifically to start with passenger and light duty vehicles, and nearly 50 of those, and we've modeled a reduction to do that by 2040. Okay, here in the fourth category, in terms of retrofitting existing buildings, as I mentioned before, this action really focuses on the changes that are needed for an all-electric future, which means phasing out natural gas and fuel oil. And this also means greater energy efficiency, or what some people call deep retrofits within our existing building stock. So these are actions we have taken over the last 10 years, and we would just need to ramp those up. And you can see with this target, we've modeled 20,000 buildings phasing into an all-electric by about 2050. I also just want to point out that over the last several years, we've been hearing that natural gas is a bridge fuel between coal-fired power plants and cleaner energy. But the more that large-scale renewables have come online lately and have helped us to clean the electricity grid, this is really no longer the case. And so working with our consultant, what we're seeing is that we're now ready, we're now at that point as we look forward to begin phasing out additional fossil fuels within our buildings. The other action that I want to highlight here is, again, that we would be doing the same thing for our own facilities. So this is something we've been doing. We would look to do more of that, again, following the council's green building ordinance, which I mentioned before. And you can see the target here. So what we'd be looking at is for existing buildings to meet half of the net zero goal by 2050. And you can see the percentages that we've modeled. So that would be, we're looking at 15% for the commercial sector, 30% for the residential sector, and of course, looking at doing all of our town facilities as well. And so, you know, I would just say, while the top 4 fit nicely on the earlier slide, we can't stop there, right? We've got to have 5. 5's a nicer number. So this is the 5th action category, which is sustainable transportation. And so the top action here is a combination of bus rapid transit with an investment in electric buses. So this would be about completing the north-south BRT corridor and replacing some of our oldest and least efficient diesel buses. Another action would be the build out of our mobility plan. And so completing this infrastructure and the improvements associated with the mobility plan will eventually create a town-wide transportation network that helps people to get around town without relying on a car. And you can see in the bottom right corner what that also helps us achieve is a 33% walk, bike, bus travel, which we call a mode split, the goal being by 2050. All right, so we have also done some public engagement, and we wanted to share some of that feedback with you. So we did, as you all know, we put out a climate action opinion survey over the last several months. We heard from over 450 residents. And some of the key takeaways we wanted to share with you this evening are about, first and foremost, challenges. We asked what people saw in the way of challenges. They highlighted accessibility and affordability, which points to the need for, again, a focus on social justice, climate justice, and social equity. Also, control being an issue. As I mentioned before, we don't have full control over some of the things that we're trying to affect. And so the public and the respondents brought that up in their responses. They also told us about things they needed, like incentives to help drive some of this behavior change and some of this climate action at the community scale. They talked about partnerships that will be needed to do this as a collective. And then also, again, they highlighted the need for advocacy, particularly where we have limited control. In terms of the town's focus, they talked about planning for a community that requires less driving and that has more walking and biking and transit travel options. They also talked about, being adaptive, building more climate resilient infrastructure. And then they also highlighted the need to adopt climate smart development rules, which, may have a connection, obviously, to the LUMO rewrite that would be upcoming. All right, so now I'm going to transition from the updates on the plan and what we've learned from some of the data to some action updates, some things we've been doing over the last couple of months. The first is the LED streetlights. We have converted nearly 2,000 of our streetlights and replaced them with LEDs, and these fixtures will last longer, thankfully, and have fewer outages. They will also, from a climate standpoint, we project that they will cut our operational emissions from streetlights in half, which is a great thing. As far as LED lighting goes, we're also scoping out projects to do more of this type of work, specifically within our parks. So we're looking to replace outdoor lighting at, for example, Cedar Falls Park, which you see here in this photo. And we are expecting, again, to see lower emissions and to save on operational expenses. And I just want to also point out that we will be pursuing some funding for this project through the Orange County Community Action, Climate Action Grant Program. So as I talked about before, greening the grid is the most impactful thing we can do. Designing for new construction that ramps up towards carbon neutrality is the second most impactful thing we can do. Transitioning to electric vehicles and supporting that conversion is the third most impactful thing we can do. And this is an image, of course, of the Rosemary project. This is a concept drawing. But this project has the potential to work towards all three of those top actions. And the project team is looking at a solar canopy, all LED lighting, and several EV charging stations. Transitioning to electric vehicles is the best way that we can lower our emissions from local government operations, almost 30%. And of course, as the council knows, Chapel Hill Transit has 3 all-electric buses on order that are scheduled to be on the road in the first half of next year. We're also excited, of course, about grant funding from the Federal Transit Administration and the Volkswagen Settlement Fund, where the town will be in a position to purchase up to 7 additional EV buses. So I just want to point out that while this is good news, we initially modeled a scenario that included 10 electric buses. Then we learned about the grant that will help us reach that target a lot sooner than we expected. And so what we're now doing is planning to evaluate those 10 buses and also then consider how we can expand on that target going forward. Again, in addition to operating more electric vehicles, we're also looking to expand charging opportunities. And one recent example of this work is that we did upgrade the charging stations at the 140 West parking deck. And these now provide additional ports for EV users to charge. Shifting gears a little bit more to the natural environment, with a grant from the Duke Energy Foundation this spring, the town planted 41 trees across 5 of our public housing neighborhoods. So in addition to adding natural benefits, some of the residents did reach out to say that they also appreciated the town's efforts to make an investment in their community. I also just want to mention that as part of the town's tree planting program, at least 25 additional trees will be planted this fall as part of our Arbor Day / week celebration. And this includes new trees downtown, as well as trees along the lower Booker Creek Trail. And the final update here, we know that reducing carbon emissions is a form of resilience because it, of course, lowers the impacts on our future. We also know that we're experiencing the effects of climate change today. And so the Booker Creek Storage Basin, which is located behind Eastgate Crossing, is an example of action that the town is taking to be more resilient and adaptive to some of the changes that we're already seeing. So this project will improve water flow and reduce the depth, duration, and frequency of flooding in this area. I also want to mention that we're hearing more about climate parks. This is a term we hear more and more. And so in addition to the stormwater benefits, this project will also provide a large passive recreation area that you can, I think, see in that slide. This is within the Blue Hill District. And within this area, it will also have native streamside plants. Some public art is planned, as well as some walking trails, again, that I think you can see in that slide. All right, moving into the last phase of this presentation, some next steps. So on the plan itself, I just want to give you a summary here. We have, as I mentioned, completed the inventories. We've held a climate action summit. We have produced both project videos and the opinion survey in 3 languages. That's the first time that I've participated in something like that. It was great. And we've also modeled carbon reduction solutions for the impact potential. I went through a lot of that in the first phase, or the first section of this presentation. And then also we are well into the drafting of the plan, which we'll be sharing in early November. Just a little bit about public engagement. We started with a survey ahead of the climate summit that helped inform our thinking about the summit. We also released the video, as I mentioned. Here are some images from the summit itself. We had over 20 representatives from local and regional organizations attend the summit. And then shortly after the summit hit, we did experience the impacts of COVID in Chapel Hill. And so we, as part of this project, we decided to pivot to more online engagement. So that's where the value of the videos and the surveys, especially those in multiple languages, also became a focus for us. I'm happy to report we did receive over 450 responses, and we will be folding the major findings into the draft plan as we move forward. So final slide here. Our staff team is working on some final edits. We will be sharing the draft with you and with the public in early November. And this will include, as I mentioned before, the modeling and the survey data. We'll also be scheduling time with our advisory boards. We will be sharing this more broadly as well with the public, with our summit stakeholders, and we will continue to be working with housing and community to expand our outreach in sharing the plan. And after completing and compiling the feedback that we get over the next couple of months, our plan is to return with a final version for your consideration for adoption in January. So I am going to stop here and see if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was a good comprehensive presentation. And we filmed the LED video today, by the way, so yay, that'll be out there. Council members, do you have comments, questions, suggestions? And sorry, Jess Anderson has joined us from the meeting, so she's here with us too. So please put that in the minutes. Okay. Mr. Parker, did I see your hand go up? Go ahead.
Myself. Yeah, this is, I think, a really good start, John. Thank you for all your hard work and for bringing this to us. I have a bunch of sort of questions and comments, and most of them I'll email to you. I don't want to take up, too much time for my colleagues. But one thing I wanted to understand, where we talk about greening the grid, does that include retrofits of solar, electric, of PV on, existing structures? Is that incorporated into our thinking, or is it not?
So it definitely can be. It's not something we modeled. In other words, we didn't model the addition of solar on individual buildings or homes, that sort of thing. Where we're seeing more opportunity is in that utility scale or larger community scale investment in solar. And so that's why we modeled that. But at the same time, I think there's an opportunity to continue supporting rooftop solar or ground mounted solar for residents, businesses, whoever would be interested in taking that step.
Michael, can I tag on to that, John, we've been talking about the timeline for putting solar on our public works, transit buildings, our two largest buildings. I know that was supposed to be in the plan for when those roofs get replaced. Do you have that timeline, or can that be part of this package as we think about that?
I think it could be an action strategy as part of the overall plan.
All right. Michael, do you have more? Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick, so two related things. Unlike, I was looking at a climate action plan from another town in another state, and they, seem to have a lot more control over their building code than we do, what they can do. And you talked about advocacy. You referred, to advocacy with Duke or the other, energy providers in our community. But it seems like advocacy with the state legislature, particularly if some things change, might be more impactful, because it would give us, it could give us, potential to add things to our local building requirements that we now try to get, quote unquote, voluntarily, but we are not allowed to mandate, whether it's, AIA 2030 or a whole range of other things. So I think we ought to think more broadly about advocacy and trying to get, the permission, if you will, to do some things that could be really impactful, at least particularly in terms of new construction. The last thing I'll raise now, and like I said, I'll send you an email with some other questions or comments, is I didn't see, you touched on it in your talk, but I did not see it in, your written materials. How are we addressing, climate equity? How are we addressing that to make sure that, the benefits of, going green are spread widely and equitably through the town, and that where things, are maybe more restrictive, again, that they're made more, that it's done equitably. Data comes out daily that when in terms of issues related to climate change, it's, minorities and people of low wealth who bear the brunt of these changes.
Climate equity, climate justice, these are themes within the draft plan that you'll see. And from what I'm learning and seeing with training we're going through with the Government Alliance on Racial Equity and some other trainings connected to resilience and sustainability planning, a lot of this also seems to be in the specific design of these action strategies. So with each of these actions that I described, what I would also envision is a more detailed plan. And I think that within those detailed, I shouldn't say plan, within those detailed strategies we would try to design each one to address that.
And one last thing, I'm sorry, I thought I was done, but one last question. Do we have, or can we have in the plan, targets for reducing VMTs? It seems like reducing vehicle miles traveled, is really important. I mean, it's clearly better if people don't drive at all, and then the second best is driving an electric vehicle. So can we, or do we, or will we have specific targets on reducing VMTs over time?
Well, one thing I didn't share with you, but it will become more clear when you see the detailed work behind some of this, is that many of the calculations are related to reductions in VMT. So for example, with the EV charging, with the walkable development, with increased mode split, a lot of those calculations are based around assumptions for reduced vehicle miles traveled. So I think that in addition to the way we've calculated things, I think there is an opportunity or a way for us to highlight those reductions more clearly.
Okay, thank you.
Karen?
Thanks, John. I echo Michael's appreciation for the work that's gone into this so far. I just have a few questions. One is, if I understand correctly, a consultant did this initial kind of modeling and measurements for us of the greenhouse gases and what will have the greatest impact. Is that right?
That's right.
So have you thought about yet, or is there a plan for how we'll, once we have the plan in place, how we will kind of monitor impact and evaluate whether, what we're doing is working, or if we need to change? Will we need to bring in a consultant periodically, or can we get our own software to do that?
One of the thoughts that we've been having is, and this is a little bit, I think it's unconventional, at least as far as what I've seen, but maybe it's a change that we will see more of, and that is to do frequent inventories, 4 to 5 year inventories, and also 4 to 5 year updates on the climate action plan. And what we think that will do for us is, number one, like you said, it'll help us measure these things more frequently, but it will also help us stay more attuned to changes in technologies and efficiencies, policy changes at the federal and state level, maybe even grant opportunities and partnerships. So I guess the basic idea there is that we see a real benefit in a more frequent approach to updating this plan, and along with that to do the measurement as well.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think frequent makes sense, and especially technologies are changing so quickly. So that's great. I think I have 1 or 2 more questions. One is around, we know that land use is one of the ways that we can have the biggest impact on the future in terms of emissions. My question is, I know you said that we would be sort of the best place to do that, to consider those kinds of changes would be in the Flume and the LUMA rewrites. But I'm wondering if we're having this conversation now, which is great. The LUMA rewrite could be a year or 2 years, hopefully sooner. So I'm just wondering if, as part of this process or part of the plan, you can include sort of recommendations, I guess, that, you know, we would implement them through the LUMO, but what are the kinds of things we should do in the LUMO to achieve our goals, so that we don't forget by the time we get to that. Is that something that could be included, or are you planning to include it?
I think so. I think we could include that kind of information in the plan to, as you said, to help provide a connection between the two plans, or the two pieces. Yeah.
Efforts. Yeah, I think that would be great. Like breaking down those silos. The last thing it's a question. I don't know the answer. But as you're talking about the green building, and a lot of the green building would need to happen in future builds. And as Michael was saying, we can't require a lot of things, but there's things we kind of ask for. Based on your research and digging deeper in this, I'm wondering if we should have a more specific menu, or deeper understanding of, you know, okay, we feel like we can ask for 2 things from this development, or 1 thing, or 5 things. Like, what should those things be? Like, solar is going to have the most impact, or, you know, whatever it is. Are there any guidelines that can come out of this that give us maybe more concrete direction on what we should be advocating for in new development or retrofits?
Yeah, I think one thing that became clear in working with the consultant is if we can hold new development to the same standard that town buildings are held to, which is the AIA 2030 standard, ramping up to carbon neutrality, that standard alone would do a lot, according to the modeling, to achieve you know, a good bit of the reduction that we're looking to see. So I think the challenge there, of course, is, as you all have mentioned, that we as a local government are limited in terms of what we can require through the building process. And so I think where we're going to need to spend some time, possibly in addition to the advocacy that Councilmember Parker talked about with the building code, and maybe flexibility towards what local governments can do. I've also been thinking about, you know, what sort of incentives might we look at to help drive developers towards these goals. You know, we do have some incentives in the Blue Hill District right now, for example, and I know the Park Project is pursuing those because they were interested in those incentives, which are fee-based. So, you know, maybe there's more of those kinds of things, fee waivers, or possibly even tax rebates, other things that we could explore to help entice the development community to move along with us on this goal.
That's great. I would love to hear your recommendations on those with the plan. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you. I have Hong Bin, then Alan, then Jess.
Yeah. Well, again, it's really glad to hear this update, because the council has expressed its priority on this project many times. So it's glad that actually we see something that's moving forward. So I think that I'm very interested in this the quantitative framework, because, like you said, in the end, we want to make sure that we reach that goal, and it has to be measured. The things that, or the actions that we're going to take, it has to be measured for us to know whether or not we're on the right track. Otherwise, we thought we're doing a lot of things, but in the end, it's like not enough. So I think we need to know where we need to go. I think so that makes it very important for us to measure things that we think it's the key performance indexes. I think if in your the formal action plan that come out, I would like to see more details of what are the indexes that we're going to measure, so that a quantitative framework, I think, will be very important. And you mentioned about more inventory, like regular inventory evaluations from time to time. But I think the problem with that approach is it's like review. It's like review how well we have been doing. If we can have something more instead of retrospective, if we can do more things that's prospective, like when there's a new project coming up, or when we're evaluating different LUMO, writing like different approaches of development. If there's some tool that's available to the council to say, if we choose this project, or if we choose this type of development, then what's the environmental impact it's going to be? If there is that kind of quantitative tool, I think that would be very helpful for us to be taking that as a part of our decision and say, this development project, what's the environment impact it's going to have? I think if we have that kind of project, when a new developer bringing a project, let's say if they want to bring, like say, plant a lot of trees or keep a lot of trees in place instead of do a clear cutting, what's the environmental impact is that? So if these things that can be incorporated into this environmental impact framework, I think it's going to be very helpful. It will streamline a lot of things and also provide a lot of flexibilities for the developer to decide whether or not they want to keep more trees, or let's say build bike lanes, like connecting their building with the downtown, or those kind of things, if they can be quantified. Versus another, like they can install some solar panel. So how to evaluate those different approach, and there is some like coherent framework to evaluate these different things. I think that would be very helpful if you can do some research, or maybe reach out to our consultants if they have that kind of tool. I think that would be very useful. So that's one thing. And another is for the action plan. Of course, you can do more like abstract kind of evaluation and say which approach is most impactful. I think it will be also helpful if we can incorporate that with the things that the town is planning to do anyway. Like we have the LUMO rewriting on the horizon, and at the TCAP advisory board, I heard about the urgent need for us to invest in our infrastructure, like repaving the roads. So if our climate action plan can in coordination with these things that the town is going to do, let's say if we're going to do some repaving projects, can we incorporate bike lanes into it? Those kind of things. So that will also have significant climate impact. I think that will be great. If you can reach out like to other departments, transportation or housing or other planning, the things that they're planning to do anyway. So if our action plan can take those things into account, I think that will really give the council a very solid action plan, know that these are the things that we're doing and how we're going to incorporate the climate change perspective into the things that we're doing now. So I think these are the two things I think I'm hoping that to see in the action plan you're going to propose.
Alan, followed by Jess, and then Ty.
Yep. So, as we know, emissions tend not to recognize boundaries. I'm wondering to what extent can we work cross-jurisdictionally with the town of Carrboro, Hillsborough, and the county to take some substantially similar or the same actions. I realize that to embark on this plan is a lot, and you've done a lot, John, as has the rest of staff. But I'm wondering to what extent some of this work can also be done in concert with other jurisdictions in our county.
I think that several of the action categories have the potential for those connections, and we have the Orange County Climate Council is a place where we all meet and have a chance to work together. And so I think as this plan is now rolling forward with a draft, that's something that I can share with my colleagues in Carrboro and Hillsborough and the county, and we can start having conversations about some of those overlaps and connections as well. So I think it took some time to get us to the point where we could share it. But I think it's also a good place now because we can have those more detailed conversations.
Thank you.
Not forget our partners at UNC as part of that group too.
Yes.
All right, Jess, then Ty, then Amy.
Thank you, John. And I'm sorry for being late, everyone. We had a minor foot injury, so we had to get all of us cleaned up. Actually, one of my questions was about UNC. I think Council Member Boincy's question is important, and I would expand it, as the mayor said, to asking what are UNC's plans and how are we kind of really streamlining those and working in lockstep with them to make sure that not only are we capitalizing on each other's efforts, but also even trying to influence theirs.
Well, I would say, again, UNC is part of that council as well, but we've also been having meetings with UNC. We were having them quarterly starting a couple of years ago, specifically related to climate action. So I think it's a matter of maintaining those conversations. We have a lot of the same goals too, and they have a nice carbon reduction. They have a nice sustainability plan that leads them down a similar path. And so I don't mean to repeat myself, but I do think a lot of it is, now that we have more that we can share, I think it's about having additional conversations and looking for points of overlap.
So what are places that you think that we won't overlap or that we need to think about in terms of maybe trying to align better with them?
Well, I don't know if it's not having overlap, but I personally haven't had as many conversations about housing or the residential sector, for example. And maybe that's a place where, looking at phasing out natural gas and fuel oil. Obviously, the university, there are a lot of folks in Chapel Hill who are living in Chapel Hill because of the university, and maybe that's a place where we can find some alignment.
Okay. I think you kind of answered my question about the GARE involvement. I'll just be looking forward to understanding a little bit more about kind of what framework GARE is going to help us to utilize, or how that kind of climate equity will play out for us. So thank you for kind of thinking about that and working with them. I'm also looking forward to kind of seeing those targets and kind of measuring our progress over time. I think that will really help us to see, how are we doing? What are things that are working well for us? Where are places where maybe we need to take additional steps? So I think that'll be really great. And hopefully we could do some sort of dashboard or something where we can kind of see it easily or understand it. So I don't know if that's possible, but I think that would be really important just for us in the public to be able to kind of see where we are. And then finally, what are ways, again, I know others have mentioned that we can't really force people to do as much as maybe we would like, but what are ways that we can incentivize kind of larger private parking lots, buildings to go to LEDs? What are places where we can kind of use some incentives? I know we can use advocacy or just trying to put out there what's available, but are there other ways that we can incentivize folks to do things that maybe they otherwise wouldn't do?
I think there are, we've taken advantage of utility programs that we fit into just because of the fact that we're a local government, but they would also apply to small businesses, for example. So I think there are ways that we can not only create incentives, our own incentives, if we have that ability, but also point to the incentives and programs that are available with utilities and other partners so that more of the community can take advantage of those.
I think that would be great. And just thinking through how we're going to get that messaging out and how we're going to maybe even just give accolades to folks who like opt in, or make sure that it's really visible what they can do, and also any efforts that people are taking. I think that would be great too. But yeah, as others have said, thank you for kind of putting this all together, and it looks like we're going in a good direction. So thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
Ty, then Amy.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Most of my questions have been answered. I had a quick question about the survey that we sent out. Was any demographic data collected with that survey?
There was, and we can actually, what we're going to do is as part of sharing the survey data, we will also be sharing the demographic results from the survey.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then the partnerships you mentioned was a huge part of the action plan, and I was just looking forward to seeing the specific partners and kind of areas of key collaboration spelled out in the draft plan. And then the other thing was kind of going off of Councilmember Anderson's comments. I would love to kind of see a continual community engagement plan as a part of the action plan, how we can continue to allow the community to plug in and understand kind of the impact and progress we're having from their perspective. And yep, that was all I had. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Amy.
Yeah. Again, John, thank you for all your hard work. We really appreciate it. It strikes me looking at the plan that it's very comprehensive, but it's missing a piece for me, and that's the environmental piece, right? When we're talking about climate change, so much of that is preserving some of the natural land we have, which is already, it provides all those environmental services, it sequesters carbon for us, it handles stormwater, it does so many things. And I'd really like to see us include that in here. When we talk about, in the land planning portion of it, we talk about densifying and doing those kind of things. And the partner of densification then should be protection, right? That we not only grow denser, but we find ways at the same time. I mean, it would be lovely to do it one-to-one, but at the same time that we're densifying, we find ways to preserve land in other places. So I think other council members have mentioned things like trees, figuring out ways we can incent people leaving more green space, keeping more green space. As you move forward with this, if we can try to include that more, I think that it's an important part. And I appreciate the stormwater in back of Eastgate. I think that new plan is kind of the sort of thing that I'm thinking about as we go forward, and making sure that, again, it's not just technology solutions, but that we go back to the Earth's technology and use that as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, now you get me. Poor John, I ping on him all the time about climate and environmental issues. He works hard and he's passionate about it, so I appreciate that part. I was gonna add on to some of the other things that have been said, but we definitely need that green stormwater infrastructure as part of our building codes and all those things, and I didn't see that specifically listed. I know that we're working on our own stormwater plans, but that needs to be part of all development plans going forward for anything for that green stormwater infrastructure. I didn't see anything about waste reduction. You know, I'm big on composting and all the things. We had our swag meeting on Monday night, and looking at our waste stream, that's the next biggest chunk to bite off, is getting more composting to reduce waste in our landfill. But it also reduces those vehicle miles traveled when you don't have as much waste to take to the transfer station. It's a big help. So I'd like us to consider that as part of our plan as well. Love the thing about adding more trees back in, and I think we need to tell that story better. We've had 2 big grants to help us put more trees in. We did over 200 last year. I know we're working towards a big number this year as well. We do have hot spots in town, which is places that register higher heat. So we're trying to make sure that we go after those places, that we go after helping. I love that we put our trees in the public housing, but other neighborhoods as well that may want trees and stuff, to work with more people for doing that. And the biggest thing in my mind here is working with Duke Energy. I know that we're very grateful for the grants they give us for EV charging stations, for trees, for other projects we have going on, but they really have a chokehold on all of the cities in North Carolina on not moving forward fast enough. Their goal, which we didn't sign on originally to, is to have everything done by 2050. We can't wait that long. And if you look across the nation at other electric companies, They're moving much faster than that. I was looking at one today that's moving to having all their own vehicles being electric vehicles by 2030. There was a lot of goals that are in the next 10 years, not the next 30 years. And so I know that we have to work with the Utilities Commission. We have to work through all kinds of different avenues, but the whole hold up on renewable energy rests really in Duke's hands at this point in time. And I am hopeful with the change in the state legislature that there'll be support and that cities can band together with metro mayors and with the league to talk about how we get more renewable energy options in our electric grid. I love when people put their own solar on the roof, but truthfully, they have to send it back into the grid. You're not allowed to really tap it into your own house right now. There's got to be more options. I know UNC has fought tooth and nail to try to figure out how to have a solar farm and get credit for it. They'd have to have a large parcel, not in town, because it needs to be much larger than what there's any land available. And they're having difficult discussions. Although Duke Energy did allow Duke University to move forward on that kind of project, and a part of the Charlotte municipality has moved forward too. So they know how to do it. We just need them to move faster. And I want our council to help advocate for making a change. After November 3rd, I think we need to make our voices heard about that 2050 is not soon enough. We need more options than that. And you saw the numbers there. I'm a big advocate of changing all of our lights wherever we have them in town to LEDs, to cut those emissions, to have better lighting actually, and to lower our utility bills. So I want us to keep moving on that. I'm glad you're applying for the climate, Orange County climate tax. Those proposals are due next week, I believe. Is that right? I think they're end of the month, so I think it's next Friday. But
November, I think, yes.
I was told by, and let's get that in.
I'll double check.
Yeah. I love the idea of a dashboard. We talk about how much we like our analytics and our dashboards so that we can easily show to the public and anyone who's interested in the things we're doing. So I love the idea of that as well. And I'm action oriented. I want us to see us doing things. I don't know if we can consider community solar on top of our parking deck. I don't know if that's an option. I know we're looking at many different versions to get the solar on top of the East Rosemary parking deck, but I don't know if community solar is an option. So that would be very interesting. And I want to make sure we reach out to our business community, as said before, to get them to convert their parking lot lights. I know a lot of them have converted their lights indoors to save the money, but their parking lot lights too. I think you forget that those lights out there burn for quite a while and take up a lot of energy. So these are all great. And I look forward to you going through our boards and commissions and people having input there as well. And are people still allowed to send their input to you?
Yes, of course.
Can you state that where they should send it? They send an email to you, or what would you like?
Email is great, and I'm now regretting the fact that I didn't put this on the last slide. But yeah, jrichardson@townofchapelhill.org. Or if it's easier to remember, I also get emails at sustainability@townofchapelhill.org.
Great, thank you. We'll make sure we put that out when we put the record of this meeting out. Let's make sure that's tagged in there so people can send their comments in. So that'd be great. All right. Thank you for all you're doing, and keep it up. Let's just not have a plan. Let's get moving on our plan.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, everyone. Our next item up is continuation of the 160D conversation, education process of council. Mr. Lyles, are you here to explain it to us? Thank you.
Yes. All right, does everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is Corey Lyles with the Planning Department. Joining me as in the past for these presentations is Elisa Duffy Rogers, our LUMO project manager. We are part of the 160D team along with Jean Poveromo and our town attorney, Ann Anderson. And we're here to do another segment of, sorry, I'm not on the first slide, another segment of talking through these topics of the new state law, which establishes Chapter 160D. I'll touch briefly on the background, and then we'll go through a couple of topics with policy considerations and talk about next steps. So again, this is the new section of general statutes that contains the rules for local land use authority. It tells us what powers we have to regulate land use. This created in 2019. There are 2 parts. Both of tonight's topics are in part 2, which are provisions that come into effect by July of next year, or once we adopt the necessary updates in our LUMO and town code. So the topics for tonight, we're going to continue discussion of advisory board review of special use permits based on the feedback we heard from you all at the September work session. And then we're going to introduce approvals with vested rights. After each of these topics, we'll stop for discussion since these are, again, highly technical and good to take in small doses. So what we have as a reminder in the state statutes in 160D is this provision that advisory board recommendations may not be used by council as the basis for deciding special use permits. What this means at a fundamental level is it's probably not wise to transmit advisory board recommendations to council if they do hear them, if they do hear special use permits. The council is meant to make decisions based on what is presented at the formal evidentiary hearing that happens at your meetings. So we talked last time in September about the future role of boards and commissions in the SUP process. The law, Chapter 160D, does offer that the advisory boards can be an informal preliminary forum for discussion of projects. It just happens outside of the council's consideration of the project. So that can continue where they are just that preliminary forum. We could say that since they cannot directly communicate with council about their recommendations, that we could reconsider how many boards or any boards involved in that review. Last time we opened up to other ideas, and council members raised the idea of having advisory boards make reports to staff, and planning staff are the ones writing the reports that go to council, so we could be sort of a middle person in considering their input and seeing if anything they recommend is warranted to include in the draft resolutions of approval for a special use permit. So we looked into that idea. Advisory board reviews the SUP at their meetings. They provide input to staff instead of recommendations to council. Staff then evaluates that input and includes appropriate conditions in the resolution of approval. What's important here is that staff needs to do an unbiased but careful evaluation. If the advisory boards recommend a condition, we need to consider whether it helps the project meet the 4 findings of fact necessary for an SUP approval, whether it's valid under state law and within our zoning authority, which is an important part of part 1 of Chapter 160D. And if we do see that it could help offset negative impacts of a development, we would need clear evidence founded in data and research that this promotes health and safety, mitigates impacts, and or furthers the goals of the comprehensive plan. So we would need to do that evaluation beyond what we do right now, which is just more of an initial screen of what can be put into the SUP resolution. So just to consider the pros and cons of taking this approach. It does provide a way, and council members seemed very interested in maintaining this, a way for boards and commissions to raise unconsidered issues about a special use permit proposal, things that had not been considered previously in the review before it comes to advisory boards. However, this would add some time to the review process to accommodate that staff evaluation after the advisory boards go through their review. Staff would need to spend several weeks, maybe a month, preparing our final reports and would not go directly to council for hearing. We need some time in between. We wonder whether the boards and commissions will appreciate having their input vetted by staff and whether they'd see us as gatekeepers who we, again, are be acting in an unbiased way, but there's the worry of impressions. And in addition, a related issue, we just want to think as well about the role that the public plays at advisory board meetings. Currently, on an SUP review, all the advisory boards hear public input where community members can raise concerns. That can continue. It could give a false impression that these concerns are going to be communicated directly to council or incorporated in the suggested conditions. But we could see, again, community members raising issues that had not been considered before. So I think we'll stop here and put to council some questions. Does this approach of having staff evaluate advisory board input seem like a good approach that we should adopt for our special use permit reviews? If so, should advisory boards continue to hear from the public on community concerns?
Amy? Oh, wow, everybody was trying to Amy, then Karen, then Alan, then Jess.
So I personally find the advisory board input very valuable in the process. I realize that council will not be able to receive it directly, but often they think of stipulations that really do add to a project. So I see value in having them review it for us and then submitting to staff. One of the things the Planning Commission did with site plan review is that it was a little confusing to the public who would show up thinking they could influence how the discussion was going or the voting. And so the Planning Commission, because they can only, it's just a checklist approval, the Planning Commission made clear at the beginning of meetings that, you know, if this meets the standards in the law, we have no choice but to approve it. So I think something like that can go a long way to making sure that the public understands what the process is. And I know currently I often see projects that have gone through the T-Board or through the Planning Commission, stipulations have been made, and those stipulations do come to us in our final resolution. So I'm wondering if it's a little pessimistic to say that this is going to add a month to the process.
Okay, Karen, then Alan.
I agree with Amy that the advisory board input is really valuable. I would be concerned about, I feel like advisory board members, see their role as advising council. And I think if I would be worried about putting staff in that role of sort of deciding what of advisory board input moves forward and what doesn't. I feel like we'd have to pay staff a lot more to do that to them. I think that's just, I don't think that's a good position to put staff in. I would be concerned about that role. So I don't know what the answer is other than just getting rid of SUPs because I want the input, but I don't think that's the best way to go about it.
All right, Alan.
Yeah, so one, I had a clarification question and then a comment to Corey. So from what I'm hearing about how disconnected advisory boards have to be, I guess, statutorily from the council when it comes to SUPs, I mean, just technically speaking, even if, say, staff evaluated advisory board input, would council members be able to determine whether something that was included in, say, our packet was something that was informed by an advisory board like the Planning Commission? I hope that question is clear. If not, I can.
Yeah, I think you're asking whether there's kind of attribution of
Yeah.
of what may become a condition in the special use permit, whether it came from an advisory board or not.
Yep.
I'm not sure. We could double check on that. Again, the idea is that we're trying to keep the advisory boards from having a voice at the SUP hearing, because that's what state law is telling us, that it needs to be based on the expertise and those who have standing speaking at the hearing. So I don't know if just that level of even identifying where conditions came from, where the ideas were generated, if that would be an issue or not, but we could look into that.
Okay, yeah, I'd be curious about that. Yeah, and then on to my comment. So, my concern with that scenario in which staff evaluates advisory board input my concern there is that, if an advisory board, has some expectation, or individual members have some expectation that their input is going to be kind of, worked in somehow, and, we get through the process, council gets its materials, council takes a vote, and a member or two, or maybe the whole advisory board determines that, our input was not incorporated. I can just see a lot of room for upset because there have been some unmet expectations about that. So kind of from the advisory board standpoint, I could see a lot of frustration with that process. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think my comments were very much in line with Councilmember Boincy's. Again, I would definitely want to understand more, Corey, about how much we could know, or that attribution issue, because I do think that as it stands now, sometimes advisory boards feel like they're not sure when the council takes their advice or doesn't, or how much we listen. And I think that would be 200 times worse if there was no way to draw a direct line between something that came from an advisory board and then decisions we're making. So I think it would just be a way to, I guess, just make the advisory boards feel frustrated. But I guess I'd be interested to know, and I'd also be interested to know what the current members on advisory boards would like. Have they kind of weighed in on this, or given some guidance about, given the restrictions? I mean, it's not like any of us love our options right now, I don't think, but given our options, has anyone given a preference or a justification for a preference about, would you rather be consulted and then maybe not everything gets passed on and we don't know that it comes from you, or would you rather just not hear it?
We're planning some engagement with advisory board members. We're going to try to hold a meeting before the end of the year, but after Thanksgiving, it'll probably need to be, and gather them together. We wanted to first get council's direction so we know what options are on the table, and then we'll get input on this process decision from advisory board members.
Okay, yeah, I think that sounds right. And again, I think certainly trying to limit the number of SUPs, obviously, I think we're already trying to do that. So that seems rational, but I think I do have some concerns, and I know that there's not really a great answer here, but this just seems like it's a way for people to get frustrated or to not understand where their input is going, that it might feel like it was going into a black hole, or that they're wasting their time, or, I just think there's a lot of opportunity for frustration. But I know that I know your options are limited, and you're trying to honor our request, which was to help give advisory boards a voice. So I kind of understand where we are. I'm just not sure that if we're setting ourselves up for something worse or not. So I'll be definitely interested to hear what the advisory boards say. But thank you for continuing to work on this.
Corey, I'm going to ask for a clarifying question before I call on someone else. So all the boards produce action minutes after they have their meetings. We don't always all get a copy of them. I know I only get a couple of them. I go looking for the rest. Is it legal under this new definition that if there was an SUP and they reviewed and the action minutes just went out to all of us, like every other board does, that then it'd be up to us to look at that information in there? Are we allowed to do that? We read our emails and things. And the other half of this question is, could an advisory board member come to the meeting and speak?
I believe council members reviewing the action minutes would be fine. I mean, that is public record, so anyone can find those action minutes. Some of it's about perception, because state law isn't saying exactly like you can do this, but you can't do that. We need to avoid the perception that advisory board members are inserting themselves in the discussion through their recommendations at an SUP hearing, that if the advisory board recommendations were being considered part of the record, submitted as evidence, then that's an issue. If council knows what advisory boards said at a meeting, I think there would be some caution because there's not supposed to be conversation in advance of the hearing. And to your second point, if advisory board member came and spoke, I mean, it's true that all members of the public are often interested in speaking at the hearing. And if they do speak, it falls upon council to make the decision only based on what they hear from those who have standing at an SUP hearing.
Yeah, I know it is, but we let everyone speak and we're only supposed to say, yeah, I know.
So we're not telling you to keep advisory board members from speaking at the meeting. We're not telling you to change current practice in that.
Okay, thank you. I had Hong Bin, then Michael.
Yeah, well, I think at one time point we discussed if it's possible to include advisory boards representative, let's say advisory board chair, to give presentation as a expert eyewitness testimony. Is that a possibility to do that?
What we've heard from the town attorney is that just by being on advisory board, they are not therefore qualified to have standing or to be an expert. If they separately had expertise in something that applies to the hearing, then that's a different story. But just being on advisory board does not grant them that.
So you're saying that, let's say someone serving on the stormwater advisory board, that does not qualify them to be an expert to provide testimony to the SUP hearing. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Unless they're, let's say, some stormwater engineer themselves, then they can make that explicit at their comment session.
They could be an expert witness in other ways. I think that would be a case by case basis. But yes.
Okay.
Anne, did you want to share with us? You're muted.
Yes, I mean, everything that Corey said, I agree with. And I think the important thing to note is the distinction between being an expert witness and having standing and all of these things they would need to individually qualify for. Being a member of that particular advisory board does not in and of itself lend the qualification of an expert witness. And then, of course, there's the slippery slope of someone saying, well, I'm separately qualified as an expert, and then coming in and sort of speaking on behalf of that advisory board nevertheless. So it's a tricky area. Everything about it's tricky, but you're asking all the right questions.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I want to actually harken back to something Karen sort of briefly mentioned, which is we're trying to phase out SUPs. 160D, has taken away, if I remember correctly, the ability to marry an SUP to the conditional zoning, conditional use zoning. I always get them confused. And we're moving toward conditional zoning as our primary method of reviewing projects. So do we have any sense as to how big a problem this actually is? It seems like most of the SUPs we're going to be seeing going forward are going to really be modifications to existing SUPs. We're certainly going to try, given that number one, there aren't that many places in town where the things that people want to build conform easily to the existing zoning, and that we're actively trying to get out of the SUP business. Do we see this as something, and I know you don't have a real answer, I just wonder if we're trying to solve a problem that may sort of take care of itself in some sense. If we have relatively few SUPs, then, I'm not sure with the way in which we deal with them is going to matter a whole hell of a lot, whether we go to the model that says, the staff will sort of be the intermediary, or whether we just say, they're not going to review SUPs anymore. So I was, wondering if you've given some thought to just whether this is a big problem, a middle-sized problem, or a little problem.
It is true that we expect to see more conditional zoning, particularly for larger scale projects that just tend to not be able to build what they want to under existing zoning. anytime an applicant needs a change in their zoning district, we have a good opportunity to steer them onto the conditional zoning path, which means that advisory boards can play the role that they currently play in reviewing and recommending to council when it's a conditional zoning. We pulled up some data a few months back, and I'll need to look back at it, just a breakdown of how much over the past 15 years we see SUPs coming forward with an included rezoning versus standalone. And that would be a proxy for the SUPs with an included rezoning we would expect to be the kind of projects that become conditional zoning. There were still a good number of projects that were a standalone SUP, including modifications to previously established SUPs. It does happen. It's hard to say exactly how much it'll happen in the future, but it is true that the current volume of SUPs is expected to go down.
Okay, anyone else? Corey, I'm not sure we gave you enough information other than I'm hearing resounding that we want our advisory board still involved, still reviewing. We understand that SUPs may be going away or not as used, but we can't force people not to choose that path. So we have to have guidelines to go down that path. If there's a way for our advisory board input, whether you can research that if they just send out their action minutes and we just all read everyone's action minutes, that may help. But I think you're going to have to work with our attorney to find out what we can legally do to have that input incorporated, so that we can actually see it or use it or ignore. I don't want to say that because I like reading it. So it's helpful because, as stated earlier, we have a lot of people on our advisory boards who help us dive deeper into things and come up with stipulations we may not think of. So
I think what I've heard is some concerns about the alternative proposed, but if we move forward in engaging the advisory board members, we could still present it as an option and get their reactions to the idea of staff evaluating their input. And we can do that engagement and report back to you all as you continue to think about this decision.
thank you.
All right, and I'll turn things over now to Elisa to talk about vested rights.
Good evening. As befits our discussions about 160D, we are moving on to another technical zoning topic. This time we're turning to development approvals with vested rights. So you're asking, what is a vested right? A vested right is the right of an applicant to continue a development as it has been approved by the town, even if the applicable regulations have been amended after an approval was granted. The vested rights provisions are included in the North Carolina General Statutes to protect approved projects from being adversely harmed by changes in development regulations that may be enacted after the project has been approved. Keep in mind that the vested rights are not unlimited. After an approval has expired, if an applicant has not substantially commenced the work shown on the approved plan, the approval expires. And if it expires, the applicant must then go back through the development review process and would then at that time be subject to any new or revised regulations. So as I've said, the vested rights are time limited. They expire if the work has not substantially commenced after or within the mandated time frame. So really, what are those time frames? Under 160D, there are two specified times. The default rule is 1 year, meaning most approvals would be valid for 1 year if the applicant has not substantially commenced work. 160D does provide for site-specific vesting plans, which have vesting terms that range from 2 to 5 years. So 160D really does require us as a municipality to specify which approvals constitute site-specific vesting plans. If the town does not specify which ones are site-specific, then all development approvals are considered site-specific vested plans and are valid for 2 years. So when we think about this, we need to think about what types of approvals might really require a longer vesting period, such as permitted by the site-specific vesting plan. Generally speaking, the lengthier the development review process and the greater the detail required on a submitted plan, then the longer the vesting term. So currently, the LUMO specifies that our form district permits in Blue Hill and our special use permits are considered site-specific vesting plans. At this time, the LUMO uses the term site development plan, which was a term that was previously used in the state law. So our question to you as we open this discussion is, should we continue to specify that form district permits and special use permits are these site-specific vesting plans? And are there any other development approvals that would be necessary to specify as these site-specific vesting plans, which, as you can tell, I'm having trouble saying. So as you see on the screen, there are possibilities that we have. There would be site plans, final plats, conditional zonings, minor subdivisions, and preliminary plats. So the question that we will ask you at this point in time, are there any other approvals beyond our form district permits and our SUPs that we think might merit a longer vesting term, such as the conditional zoning, since we anticipate seeing more of those?
Are you ready for input? Okay, Michael has his hand up.
Yeah, it seems like conditional zoning would be a natural for that. The thing that's not on here, by the way, and I don't know if it's because of some other reason, is planned developments. Would those not, how are those handled right now?
So right now they are not considered a site-specific vesting plan, and so they are valid for 1 year under the current framework that we have. We did not include our more esoteric, approvals, plan developments, master land use plans in this list. Certainly we can look at that if you would like for us to do that. I would point out that both the master land use plan and our plan developments are tied to special use permits. And that will be something that we are evaluating as we're moving into the LUMO rewrite. We just typically don't see that many of them.
I know, but you asked the question.
I did ask the question.
All right, Amy.
Elisa, mostly the approvals that I see tend to have a 1 year limitation on them, correct?
Right now, under the LUMO, the only ones that do not have a 1 year are the form district permits and special use permits.
Right. So if we make, and I'm going to get this wrong, but anyway, so the other ones, whether we designate, however legally you have to do this, I think the right thing to do would be to leave the ones that we currently have as 1 year, that seems to have worked for us, and then the other ones that have the longer time frames, then consider the other category for those.
So if I understand you, continue form district permits, special use permits, and then perhaps add in conditional zoning, everything else stays at 1 year.
Well, I've seen a lot of special use permits that are 1 year also, right? As you in some of your materials, you had talked about larger, more complicated projects. I know that we have occasionally, say if we have a church that has come and gotten a special use permit, we've extended their time because sometimes just for fundraising purposes, or they have a harder time actually acting within a year. I think we've done it for preschools. So there's sometimes we've had some discretion in doing that, but for most things, if somebody's coming in, if a developer is coming in as a business and building an apartment building, that most things that I see tend to be just that 1 year.
Under state law, even as it exists today, absent 160D, if we put a 1 year time frame on a special use permit, as it is currently defined in the LUMO, we were wrong. Because the law is very clear that it should have, because we define a special use permit as a site-specific development plan, the current term. then that term of vesting is 2 years. So if we put a year on it, we were wrong.
Okay. But if we decide not to call it a site-specific vesting plan now, we could change it to what our actual practice was.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. So I guess my point is just continuing our current practice. However, legally you need to name things. And then I assume that we would have the ability to say, okay, the council could extend it again if we have a church coming that says they need 4 years to do it or whatever, that even no matter how it's defined, that we could extend that period. We just couldn't shorten it.
We can put as in the LUMO, and I don't know what off the top of my head, what our current extension standards are, but yes, we do have latitude to extend.
Okay. So that would give us the ability for special cases to act appropriately. So anyway, that would be my thinking.
And it may be the situation that the SUP was a 2-year term, and then the extension was only a year.
It could be.
That may have been how
maybe that's what it was.
Yeah,
okay.
that may have been how that happened.
The manager's authorized to give a 1-year extension, and then after on an SUP, and then after that, it has to come back to council.
Yeah. So yeah. So
I think
bless
that
you.
May have been
bless you for doing this work.
Well, you know, it's an interesting approach to vesting that the state has here, and we're just going to push the I believe button and move on.
We'll just do it. Okay. Thank you.
So I guess, you know, if we could give a little bit more direction, you know, keep form district permits, keep special use permits at that initial 2-year vesting, and then potentially add conditional zoning, and that our extensions would then continue to be a year. Is that sort of what you're saying, Amy? Excuse me, Councilmember Ryan.
If I was wrong about the SUP length and the 2 years is in fact our standard, then yeah, I think that what we've been doing seems to have been working, and absent instruction from the state that we need to change it, I don't know, you know, why. I would keep our current system and just make sure that our naming aligns with the legal requirements.
Do I have thumbs up on that from council, that you'd like to see that approach? Okay, thank you.
All right, let's move on.
Actually, can I ask one question? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask it earlier. Is that okay, Pam?
Sure.
So how does this apply to things that are applications? Because my understanding is once an application is filed, they also have the right to stay with the development guidelines or rules that were in place at the time of their completed application. So does this affect anything with applications?
It does. So somewhat. There is a related concept called permit choice. And 160D actually broadens permit choice from our current situation. And because it's pretty much a staff thing, we hadn't really decided to bring it to you, but I'll give you a thumbnail sketch, which basically is if you filed for an application today and your application is complete, you lock in the rules that are in existence today, and that is the law pre-160D. As a result of 160D, you now then have an opportunity to mix and match rules all the way through the process. And so, for example, if you like the new LUMO rules, you take the new LUMO rules. But if you dislike new stormwater rules, then you take the old stormwater rules. And so it's going to truthfully be an administrative nightmare as we move forward through this, especially given that we know that we're going to have the LUMO rewrite. Yeah, it's an administrative nightmare.
Yeah. All right, move us along here.
Move us along. So as I said, you know, I think we actually may have already answered this question because the state law does give us the opportunity to go beyond that 2 years and to extend site-specific vesting plans for 3 to 5 years if we choose to do that. I think what I just heard in our previous discussion is that you want to keep what we have and that you're not interested in the 3 to 5 year terms as a general rule. 160D does give us the opportunity, if you have a project that you know is going to take a long build out at the time of approval to extend beyond that 2 years. So that's just something that we'll need to be keeping in the back of our mind as we move through projects. But I think based on our previous discussion, we really don't need to discuss this slide. Is that true? Okay. Which then brings us to the end of this presentation almost. We have a schedule that works toward making all of our necessary updates by the spring of 2021, ahead of the effective date for 160D. Our next step in the process is to hold a virtual meeting with our development review boards, as we discussed a few minutes earlier, and to apprise them of our 160D process and to give them some opportunity to weigh in on the SUP review process. We will come back to you at a work session either in December or January to talk about more wonderful fun zoning topics, including changes to the LUMO definitions, and then having an additional conversation with our HDC appeals. And if the timing works out, we will also bring back to you what we heard at our meeting in December with the advisory boards. And thank you. And if you have any other questions or concerns, we'd be happy to hear those at this time.
Thank you. I know this has been an education process and you're going to continue to educate all of us and our advisory board members as well. So thank you, and the public about this process. So thank you. All right. Any final comments from council before we move on? Great. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. All right. Next on our agenda is item about how council works with a process for council initiated resolutions. And we have Maggie McGlynn joining us as our facilitator this evening. She's been with us before at the council retreat. And I know most of you spoke with her on the phone before the meeting. So I'm going to turn this over to Maggie to lead our discussion for us, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. I appreciate it. Nice to see you all again. And Hung Bin, I am sorry that you and I were never able to connect for a phone call. And we'll be glad to catch up with you after this meeting. But I do appreciate all the time that folks offered to me. I'm a horrible example of getting information to you before the moment your meeting starts. And I do apologize. I actually was still receiving information and sorting through and trying to pull together what would be the most helpful information for this particular conversation that also tees up additional ones. So if you haven't, can access your email, this came literally just before the start of the meeting, some key ideas that I wanted to offer to you. By raise of hand, how many people have the information? All right, and yay. So I wanted to kind of get some stuff in writing, just to kind of walk through, share some concepts and ideas, and really call the question around, in particular, some beginning steps specific to the resolution. Now, I am inviting dialogue this evening, and I know you are a very respectful group where you keep yourselves muted, keep that background noise down, and I would say after I do a little bit of a walkthrough, I would actually love to have you feel free to jump in with comments and questions. Pam, is that okay with you that I use that method rather than at the end? Okay, wonderful. So I have been asked to support you guys around working better together. As you all know, this stemmed in response to a request to have a conversation this fall to look at ways to work better together and look at team dynamics. And as I think I mentioned to most all of you, but Hung Bin, because I didn't have a chance to talk with you, Pam, you forwarded me the letter that Jess, you sent to the full council that kind of gave me a, where am I starting from? And so what I have for you today, because we have just a limited time, I will be complete by 9 o'clock because you have a closed session. So I'll work within the time that's available. And so in particular was looking at what does it mean for member-initiated resolutions? And I wanted to begin with some of the big takeaways that I had from the larger conversations. And the first one is, it's important to you that you have your process clarified for bringing forward, and I use both petitions and resolutions. I'm learning about your ways of doing business, and around protocols, timeline for informing, including, and engaging each other and the public. And I think the latter part of that sentence is a key takeaway. How is it possible to create a way of doing business that everybody is feeling like they're right in with all that's unfolding? A second major kind of category of information of a takeaway was fundamentally around some communication methods and transparency. And I'm looking at it, highlighting how you respond to emerging issues, how you might have intentional leadership actions that you want to bring forward, and to stay grounded together, that aspect of being leaders for all residents of Chapel Hill. And so how is it possible to have your communication methods and transparency that really can enable all of those things to happen? And then finally, a third takeaway that I had was around this commitment to shared beliefs about really how to be and act, developing trust, and creating space for what I am terming robust policy dialogue, so that there's kind of a space to be able to say, what are we thinking? What are we up to? What are we bringing forth that might inform what you do as a council? And so I had 8 interviews. I included Maurice. I was doing some, at least fill in some gaps for me, interview conversations with Maurice, but I went back through all of my notes and pulled out, 12 ideas. And honestly, they all kind of fit under these 3 major categories. So just quickly for background, you've had a total of 4 resolutions since 2016. 2 came in 2016. 1 was in 2017, and then this most recent one that was in June. So one takeaway I have from that is that this is a method, but it hasn't been used a lot. And I definitely got the impression that there wasn't a typical, and there wasn't, and there isn't necessarily, there hasn't been a place where it's laid out completely. So it's like, that's cool. I was also hearing people use the term petitions, and I was trying to distinguish what's the difference between a petition and a resolution. And I do see the difference in it. And I noticed that in your manual, your council procedure manual, you do have information around how petitions work, which of course is primarily calling on the citizens, residents to be able to bring things forward. But it has one last little line that says, oh, and council initiated petitions can be received as well, which then I assume follow the same guidelines and concepts that are laid out in your manual. While I did see, and in this, looking at the guidelines, I noticed that there are protocol for documentation, for tracking, for follow along, for updating, which seems that in general, when there are ideas being forward, is a good process. So you're going to hear me suggest that there may be some things that you do as you process petitions that might be helpful to you with resolutions. And after you finalize your work looking at resolutions, you might notice there are some things that could support petitions for clarity and process. So I just encourage you to think about in defining council or member initiated petition or resolutions, having common procedures, of course, might be logically useful for you. So as I mentioned, the council member initiated resolutions, I think somebody kind of referred to them as a bit messy. That they've each been different, and there probably hasn't been absolute clarity on an absolute process. So what I'm offering this evening, and given our limited time and focusing on resolutions, is the possibility of agreeing on the first few steps that I'm offering here on how you might bring these forward. And again, it would reflect that element of informing and engaging each other and the public. So let me just pause for a moment and hear if there's comments or questions before we get into some of the particular suggestions I have. So I gave you my big takeaways. We're going to focus specifically on the resolution steps, and we have a parking lot, an official parking lot already started right here that I have put on the couple of second and third takeaways, and am ready to capture anything else. So let me just pause for a moment. Feel free to all unmute. And are there any comments or questions before I lead us right into the details? No takers? All right, then I'll keep moving on. So it struck me that, you know, probably the biggest, the place where there were the most comments about how the member initiated resolution process went was the clarity of expectation around who it goes to, when, and order of business. So there are 4 possibilities that I'm offering to you. And we can talk about each of these. So the first is the idea of matching with your petition protocol, that bringing a resolution to the mayor first, or in concert with the town manager, that it can be formally, officially received and documented. You could use a similar process for tracking progress and how that shows up in your packets over time. At that time of receipt, there can be assessment of what are the resources, who are the right staff for this to go to, timing. I noticed that of the last couple resolutions were both passed in June. And of course, for this past June, it tied to a budget cycle. The resolution impacted budget. So timing seems to be like an important element. And this step would allow for assigning a subcommittee if there's merit for going through detail or helping the success of moving this forward. The role here is in particular is how to facilitate forwarding concepts and ideas as opposed to gatekeeping. I actually heard one of your speakers use that term, gatekeeping, where it's a decision of forward or not. Because what I would suggest in here is that there's clarity about, well, actually really in the next one, it can talk about where you could use criteria. And so if something is received, then you can have a defined timely window for response, how it's handled, who will handle it, and a rationale if a time frame can't be met. Now with that rationale, probably would be important to come criteria. Because in fact, one might ask, why wouldn't every resolution come to a full council at whatever appropriate time? I mean, there might be good reason. I'm not sure what that criteria might be. So the third expectation is around sharing materials with council members, so people have adequate time to offer ideas, perspective, opinions. Data should probably be in there policy frameworks we could add into this language. So it gives a full opportunity for folks. And then how you might choose it to be a final draft to bring to the public, so you can get input and ideas there. Now these, I recognize that especially in the this recent June situation, that was a big time for everyone in the country, for all of my clients, in speaking to the death of George Floyd and responding around racial equity and policing. And so, that urgency, I'm sure, was palpable during that time. And it coincided with your doing a budget. So there was a lot happening in there. So that might be, that was unusual, but you don't know when you might need to take very quick action. So I am noting that even in a place of urgency, it strikes me that one can go through these same steps, though you'd be on an accelerated calendar. And then you might also look at, can you use a special meeting, something after when you think you're going to do that, to finish it. Of course, if there's other connected timelines like your budget or things like that, there might be constraints. But I'll tell you, as I was hearing the sequence of events, I just wanted to go, let's breathe for a minute. Can we pause? And so just noticing, are there ways to create appropriate pause for messages to be heard, for others to be involved, whatever. So my last couple of comments, and I'll come back to you guys. So here, these are not rocket science kind of procedural recommendations, but it is structure. You're going to hear me at another time talk about the importance for creating cultural transformative shifts. You want to look at structures, behaviors, and hearts and minds. So I've been trained that all three of those are important to address and accommodate, because you might just change one structure, but if you haven't changed behaviors or hearts and minds, it really won't matter. So on one hand, the lack of clarity of process, it seems like that's a good place to start. Make the clarification. I'm offering align it with what you already have in place. You might have reasons not to do that. But in any event, tonight I'm asking for a general affirming yes. Does this make sense? Knowing that that might be a leap of faith, because there really has been a lot of other of these elements intertwined. And so I know, Pam, if I can be so bold to say, I understand that I am here to support you guys and may be working with you between now and your retreat, or items at your retreat, to come and complete all of your ideas, that I can make that commitment to you, knowing what I know so far. And so with that, I'm going to pause and let's have everybody offer a comment or two on any of the following, or anything you want to come up with. But on one hand, do you feel comfortable putting in place some what would be written procedures and understandings with a little more detail than this, but these steps for creating a space, ease of documentation, receipt, and open, transparent process for folks hearing information and getting information. Are you willing to say, yep, let's rock and roll, move on, Maggie? Are there other comments you want to make that modify this or add to this? Or are you ready to rock and roll on after today, looking at some of the communication, transparency, shared beliefs, making it forums for talking policy frameworks and agendas, good stuff like that. So I'm going to close my comments and let's hear. So I see a hand with Alan, Hong Bin, and Jess. So let me start with those three, and Michael, and we'll make sure everybody has a chance. We'll go with those four. Alan, start us off.
Thank you, Maggie. And I appreciate the work that you've taken on and, contacting each of us and talking with each of us. I'll be honest here. I'm a bit disappointed on two fronts. So one front is the document that you've sent us. It's got some a lot of kind of powerful things in there in terms of changing the way council conducts business. And I think given that it merits a lot of time and consideration. And we only received that document maybe 10 minutes or so before this work.
Absolutely.
I'm not prepared to kind of say either way today,
Yeah.
feeling in terms of going in a certain direction or not. So that's one front. The other front is that from what I've heard you say, Maggie, it seems like there's been a lot of attention focused on the policing resolution that was passed by the council back in June. What I'm not hearing is about kind of systemic issues. I'm not hearing about other resolutions, other council actions. It kind of makes me think, is this driven by what happened in June, or is this driven by something else? I'm not sure, but if it is driven by what happened in June, that's a bit disappointing to me, because what happened in June, I think it's fair to say that all of us were very disturbed by the events in Minneapolis with the killing of George Floyd. I certainly felt that it was important that we as a council kind of meet the moment, rise to the occasion, and to take action. And that's something that we all did on that day. But so it's a bit disconcerting for me to kind of hear all this attention focused around that particular resolution, and I don't know, just makes me wonder. But that's kind of my honest 2 cents.
Yeah. And may I speak to that?
Yeah.
So when Pam, you contacted me, I did hear that the most recent resolution was a spark for revisiting this. So that is true to what I understood, what was the impetus for this. Now, actually, as I heard from each of you, I heard pretty, well, to use that term, messy sort of elements to a number of council-initiated resolutions or petitions, and in general, the manner for doing your work together. And so what I can say is I certainly learned more about the larger issues, and I would say efforts to speak to these issues, I certainly would imagine and would expect, and we can broaden the specifics, would speak to what has happened in the past on those other areas. Now, I will say that my bias in working with organizations is to build what you desire and spend the time on, so what would it look like to have really excellent efforts for working together? And indeed, it sounds like you have examples where it didn't. So anyway, so I own all of that. Alan, you wanted to say something else?
I appreciate that. I guess then my follow-up would be, well, if this is not kind of centered on the policing resolution, and there were other incidents or other council-initiated actions, I would like to know what those were. And in terms of kind of establishing a pattern, say a pattern of conduct, hasn't been one that's productive. Like I would want to know, what those incidents have been, and if there's indeed a pattern going on.
Yeah, I think the biggest pattern that I'm noticing is that there's not a lot of clarity and consistency, and even methods for calling questions and being able to kind of square things away. But at least from what I'm seeing from my list of how many resolutions, how many petitions, they're somewhat sporadic over the years. And so it might be most beneficial to you to decide, well, how do we want to operate going forward and create a system and system change by definition that will help you avoid what's occurred before. So thank you.
And Maggie, this
Yep.
last thing I say, just in response to what you said there. So
Yeah.
when I hear you say sporadic, what I'm hearing is that, I guess, council initiated actions, I mean, these are not kind of common things that we do as a council. They come up very sparingly.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, yes. And at least of the, what I'm hearing is defined as member initiated resolutions or petitions, at least from the information that I gathered, like I listed here of the number of resolutions and when they occurred, 2 in 2016, 1 in 2017, and 1 in 2020. So that's what I was referring to.
Thank you. Thank you. That doesn't sound like many, but thank you.
Yeah, but I know that, but they're all important. And you also had some petitions, probably another 6 or 8 or 5 to 7 that kind of paralleled that same process.
Got it.
Or timeline.
Thank you.
All right. Was it Hong Bin who I was coming to next?
Yes. Well, I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to talk ahead of time. Or when I got your email, it's already the weekend, so and there's really not many hours ahead of the only time frame that I
Yeah,
have.
no, you chose those couple, but didn't hear from you.
Anyway, but I think when I did read the document that you sent right before the council meeting. I think that from just reading through that document, I think I share some of the confusion. I don't know if that's the right word to describe that Alan just expressed. I don't know that if this what's the reason that we only, it seems like the document, I misunderstood that, but what's the reason that we focus on resolution? Does that mean that our petition process is clear? But for me, well, at least from my personal experience, I think we probably need to broaden that conversation, both for like the petition or resolution, and clearly lay out what's the framework or what's the procedure, what's the time frame, like who can be involved, who can initiate, what's the time frame we should reasonably expect others to propose that, and what are the other factors that will impact that time frame, like Alan just described, when there's some national importance, like event importance of urgency that we have to respond quickly. Then what are the conditions there are? I'm hoping that we have a more comprehensive kind of framework to lay out all of these things, how the councils initiate those actions. I think lots of council members would like to initiate proposals or through petition or through resolution. What is the right way of doing that? What kind of circumstances would be the best situation to use either tool, and who can initiate that, and who can be involved, what's time frame to do these things, and how to communicate with each other. I do not think that, well, at least from my experience, there is this clarity for either the resolution or the petition process. So
I agree. And that,
well,
pardon me to interrupt, but I just want to affirm that I do believe that looking at both. Now, again, Pam, I'm going to defer to you because I was retained in the middle of last week, and the focus was around the resolutions. And indeed, Hong Bin, as you stated, I think the petitions, those are both tools for member initiated actions. And I think it's worth having clarity on both.
Right. Well, I think for the council members, we we ran the campaign, elected to the council. I think a lot of us have a lot of ideas or things that we want to accomplish. I think that a document, a more comprehensive, like expanded document, will help the council members to know, like when you were given a car, you know which each knobs are, how to dial each one of them, and in order to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish.
Very good. Very
I think
good.
the way that if we can, well, first of all, we need to clarify why we do this and what
Mhm.
things are involved. I feel like the one, well, at least from the reading of the document that you just sent, I feel
Mhm.
if just focus on the resolution, I kind of like get confused
Great.
why we're doing this and why do we do it
Point
now.
well taken and agreed, absolutely. I'm thinking Jess may have been next and then Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. I think conceptually, if you're asking like, should we move forward with trying to figure out more clarity about how we move forward with initiatives that we're interested in, then I would say definitely yes.
Mhm.
I would agree that I'm not sure it's like a petition versus resolution issue as much as just, how do we, what's the process and how do we make sure it's a transparent process, like you said,
Mhm.
and a process that that folks can feel comfortable with. I think we also have to take into account, and this is not refuting anything you've said, but just adding that I think as we figure this out, we need to figure out kind of what the different paths are given what we're trying to accomplish or what is on the table. So like if there's a budgetary impact, I think that's a different story than if we're really making a statement that we think is really important for the public to hear from us.
Mhm.
And similarly, if we're making policy change, I think that's a lot different than
Mhm.
a statement about our values or what we want the public to know or that we're going to be doing something.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I think is missing from all of this is kind of the place for staff input, and for the staff to be able to have time to do their work. And again, I think that is different depending on what it is. If it's, if it's us signing on to something or making a statement for the public to understand where we stand on something, or that we plan to engage in a body of work because we think it's really important, then I'm not sure the staff, I'm assuming that often our manager or our attorney would need to look something over to make sure we're not saying anything we shouldn't. But for the most part, those are things where I think it's different. I think when it comes to budget or policy change, that's where I think we really need to make that space to make sure that we have time for all our input, for community input, but also for our staff input.
Got it. Thank you. And so in part, calling out the staff element in that first item more strongly. But I also heard you say different paths for what to be accomplished, distinguishing budget impact, straight up messaging, policy changes, et cetera. Okay.
And I'm sure there's other things that I'm not thinking of, but those are the ones that I.
Well, I'll tell you, there are so many things. Trying to even capture them is important. Right. So
but
Michael,
I would,
I'm
like
sorry.
when you talk about, I don't have much else to say, but just that I think that if you're asking for that leap of faith that we, kind of move this work forward, then I would say certainly yes.
Okay, thank you. Michael.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I agree with most of what Jess just said. I think it's, it needs to be more granular. There are different kinds of resolutions. And I think in some way or another, we need to weave petitions into it because while neither are things that happen, every week, there are more petitions than there are resolutions, since petitions can clearly be, an individual's point of view, or at least that's how I interpret it. And the way in which petitions have been handled, is often, I guess, confusing. I mean, speaking for myself, there have been petitions that I have submitted that were acted on immediately, and there were petitions that I submitted that I'm still waiting to hear back about. So, I think that it's almost, in my mind, I guess my consulting background, it's almost like a 2x2 matrix, right? It's resolution, petition, and then sort of, as Jess was saying, is it a really what I would call a substantive resolution that has policy or financial or other implications, or is it a sense of the council and sense of community resolution where we're expressing a point of view, a sympathy, but we're not, but it doesn't mean that anything of substance will actually be done.
Okay.
And those are, I think, fairly different beasts. So I think we need to get that level of granularity into this. And then I have to confess, you know, it may be the late hour, although it's not even that late for a council meeting. But based on what you sent, which I, you know, just had a chance to sort of skim, and then your, you know, verbal description, I am more confused than clear in terms of what you're actually proposing. So while I am fine with, you know, thinking about process, I really at this point can neither, you know, endorse or not endorse what you're suggesting, because at least as of this moment, I can't profess to understand it. So that's on me.
Gotcha. So two things I'm hearing, and I want to call the question on one of them. So I heard you, Michael, say, as Hong Bin did, that and Alan, you talked about it too, about also the process of petition. So that resolution and petition. Can I just ask, is everybody saying, would everybody say, yes, let's look at both of those processes in the course of this? Everybody's good with that? Okay. And then with respect to what am I asking for? Indeed, this is a conversation starter because we just have an hour for a pretty big thing. Right now, I was looking at if there were ways to, in general, frame up structures or processes for resolutions similar to petitions, but that include definite mechanisms for engaging and informing others. You know, on that premise, I was trying to get a sense of, does that make sense to you? So I apologize for any confusion. So let me check in with others who've not yet shared. Who would like to go next? Okay, let me go. Karen, Amy, I was going up and down, and Ty. Or if you want to duke it out among the three of you, jump in there.
I'll jump in.
Great.
Yeah, you know, I pretty much agree with what Michael said. I mean, I would like whatever process we ultimately agree to be as light as possible. I find government to be very process heavy and lengthy. What's drafted here, and I also have not had a chance to study it, feels like a lot of steps. So I'm hoping we can come up with something more streamlined. And what I'm not seeing here, and has always been unclear to me, one of the things that's been unclear to me is sort of, if we went through all of these steps, like who's the decider of the ultimate version, the final version? Is it the person who brought it forward? Is it consensus? Is it sort of most agree with this version versus that? Just to use a completely made up example, because this would not be the case at all with this council, like talking about HB2, you know, if there was, you know, 4 of us who were against HB2 and 4 of us were like, no, HB2 is awesome. Do we have to have a really watered down version that pleases everybody, or how is that decision made? Like, there are things that I think there are ways we can come up with, often sort of something that works for everybody, but sometimes I don't think you hypothetically wouldn't necessarily come up with something that works for everyone. And so is it important to have that discussion in public? Is this all kind of happening behind the scenes? You know, at some point there are, you know, I think there are always conversations that happen behind the scenes. That's totally fine and appropriate. But there's also kind of big difference in positions on policy and other things that I don't think should just happen behind the scenes. That, you know, it's important for people to understand our different perspectives, you know, on all sorts of things. So I guess that's a question for me, is kind of at what point does something come forward and you either support it or don't support it, and that's okay either way. And that's when you have the conversation, you know, the discussion at a meeting. Or so I'm not clear on that balance, I guess, or that line.
I think that is just an excellent question. That would be a very excellent conversation. And the ideas around where do you have the place and the time and the opportunity to talk about policies and what's needed and how do we, what do we want to use for decisions on how to make that go? So absolutely. And that whole idea of, ultimately the ultimate deciding, of course, is your voting on where you go, what you go with. But that question of, how do you figure out the authorship of resolutions and really what questions are called and how to do that in a way that fosters the great ideas that come from community, that come from science, that come from, lived experiences, and can best serve the town as a whole. And so how do you work that? Karen, I love that question. And I think that's a good one for you guys to figure out. Now, I will tell you, I've been learning a lot about politics these days. All my clients are health and human service kind of folk. And so I'll have to say there are some interesting aspects in the political environment. And so, and that's of course where you all are the experts. So anyway, so I think addressing that, Karen, great idea. So let me go to Amy, and I notice I've got about 13 minutes of your time left.
Okay, well, I will try to be quick. Like a lot of what I've heard here, I tend to be a process person. I'd like to have things laid out so we know where we're going. We have a roadmap. One of the most interesting things I've heard tonight from council is when Alan spoke and he said, we as a council rise to the occasion. And I think that one of the things that I would like to have come out of this is that when people have good ideas, that it comes into the council to be worked on and forwarded. Now, I can understand Karen's concern. I think there will be times when people will say there's a group who wants to paint everything green and a group that wants to paint everything red, and we won't be able to agree. And I think there has to be, because this is a political system that we're in, there has to be a way that that stuff doesn't die in committee, right? That it can still come forward, it can still be public, it can still be voted on. But I think in general, at least this council shares a set of very similar values. And I think that when we work together, I've had experience working with many of my other council members on committees. I think when we come together and work on things, I think that we work really well. And I think that the product is good when we all come together with our different ideas. So again, I think that having a process that lets good ideas come into the group and then says, okay, now as a group, we're going to work on this, we're going to put it forward, and we're going to have a set of steps. So, for instance, transparency is an issue for the policing resolution. One of the things that was upsetting to me is that we tried our hardest, we got things out quickly, but we couldn't get it out much in advance of the council meeting where we were voting on it. And a lot of the public was not happy that they hadn't had time to really digest it and talk about it. I mean, and they should have had at least several days to be able to do that. So, so again, I think if you have a good process set up, you can ensure things like that are so important.
Great.
So, and in terms of moving forward, I think that Michael's right. I think we need a lot more granularity and discussion of these things. I would be happy to have a committee come together to kind of talk about it and work on it.
Great. All righty. Ty and then Pam.
I'll also be super brief, and yeah, I'm still definitely learning the ropes of how council works, unlike my colleagues who have a lot of experience doing this stuff. And so I guess from my newbie perspective, I also agree that the petition as well as the resolution processes or lack thereof are pretty confusing. So I'm, glad to do that. In terms of endorsing us moving this conversation forward, I think it's, good to set processes and have transparency. In terms of the specific process that you sent us, I also did not have time to super digest that. So can't endorse that specific process, but glad to continue this as well. And then I, also share some of the same concerns that Amy raised, stuff, quote unquote, dying in committee, I guess. I think that's the term. So the ability for things to still move forward, and, looking at things in a more granular, for example, like who gets to decide the timeline, what does that look like, when specific, ad hoc outside events or things happen, how can we make sure things are still moving quickly? And so one thing that I would really like to see if we move this conversation forward is how can we make that process both lightweight, but also flexible in a sense, because, maybe that's just the youth in me, but love me some flexibility.
Yeah, I hear you. And, indeed, I think that the times really call for leaders to be more nimble than ever. And so how is that possible within your local government structures, and how to interface in new ways when, we are in a world that is oh so different than it was a year ago. So Pam, let me come to you.
I like hearing all this input because I'll be honest with you, it's been unclear to me as well. I think we've all come in with some different assumptions about how some of these processes work, and I have served on other elected bodies as well where the processes have worked slightly differently. I will tell you, I really like the appointing a subcommittee plan that we've been putting into practice the last few years. I try to find balance when you bring these things to me. Between you from different perspectives. I try to give people opportunities to participate. It also gets buy-in. I'd rather have a resolution that met the needs of, I know it can't always of all of us, but when in a resolution is we're stating a statement of belief or a situation that's going on, it's just so much more impactful if I feel like we've come together and everyone's had an opportunity to weigh in on it. And I don't want to water it down all the way like it was suggested, but there's got to be that flexibility too, something that everyone can be a part of. And then the public needs the opportunity to see it. And I would say, as important as it was to get the policing resolution out there, it was messy. And I think we could have done a better job of pulling us all together, but having either a special meeting, and I guess it was so emotional at the time too. It was just this perfect storm, but it was a perfect storm that kind of made us all realize that we didn't really have a particular process, and we were just doing what we did at the time. We were being in the reactionary mode, which I know some of these are. And so that I know some of the newer ones of you, we haven't had these discussions and about how you do a petition or how you do this or that. And that's something I think is really good for us to focus on at the retreat, because I know you get frustrated with it's so bureaucratic. I don't even know where to jump in. And going from an activist role to a council member role is also difficult because you're in a different space. But trying to find the balance, the pulling together of ideas, don't want to have it, stretch out over weeks and months either, but we also have to balance staff time involved in these things. So when I get asked to sign on for our town to national resolutions, there isn't time to, wait for a council meeting. It's usually they give me that day or 2 or 3 days. I take the town values to heart. I also run it by the town attorney, the town manager, and whatever department head this particular resolution might fit into. And then we tell you guys that we signed on to this if it meets those criteria, if it goes through. And that itself takes time. It's kind of like, why wouldn't we just jump in onto this? Well, we represent the town and we have a responsibility to make sure that we check out to see if it meets those things. And so I will say, as council members, I love that you have ideas. Some of you have done I've done petitions. And Michael, I haven't heard back from mine yet 3 years ago. So I get the frustration. We're going to be hearing about it pretty soon. I get the frustration, but I will tell you, by putting in a petition and getting another council member to sign on with you is helpful, just so that we know that it's more than one person interested. Gives more, and it's referred to manager and mayor. It gives Maurice and me a chance to talk about what would be involved to move this along, I can call you back and say, tell me more, or what are you thinking about a timeline? And let me tell you what we've got going on and how does that work? So it actually opens up a dialogue, or it can open up a dialogue, I should say. Sometimes we feel a little overwhelmed with all the petitions, as you've seen the list. So that work towards balance is where I'm usually going. And that's why I like that subcommittee to work on something so that we get some different perspectives in there and then shared with the rest of council for input. We do have to work in the constraints of that we can't have a quorum come together to work on these things. So that makes it difficult as well. And timeliness. A lot of you work full-time jobs, families, it's hard. And I get that, I fully get that. I would say that, you know, Jeannie has the resolution machine and information to put all that stuff together. So she usually needs to be involved on some part of this when we're pulling it together. And then again, trying to figure out the best path forward to get something that we can hopefully all stand behind. And we've had some other difficult things come up as well, the Silent Sam issues and other things. We're going to continue, and so we all know some steps we can take to get where we need to go. I think that's just going to be helpful.
Sounds good. I'm in agreement on looking forward. Now, Karen, let me get you in here again before we got to close.
I just want to say, I mean, I appreciate, and I think, I definitely think this council needs to do more work on, you know, transparency and clarity on process. But I just want to say that I'm proud of this council for doing what we did in June. I think there was a need to take action, and I think it was the right thing to do. I think it wasn't an ideal timeline for sure. And there were delays, even, you know, there was the opportunity for everyone to see it. I hear the concerns about it not being the ideal process. I think we have to sometimes, you know, be responsive and be agile and do the best we can. I think it was critically important, and I think it was very much appreciated by the community. And so I just wanted to say I don't.
Yeah,
I'm proud of it.
Yeah,
of this council for doing it.
And I'm proud of you guys too. And I would honestly say, I mean, to me, the world has shifted in so many important ways. And right now, I think there's lots to be ready for, to speak to quickly and to respond to, because there's a lot of hurt that people are in right now from a poverty economic standpoint, you know, the glaring racial injustices. You know, there's lots of work to be done in so many ways. And so, you know, Karen, you know, may not have been ideal indeed, but what's great is, and this is really, Alan, where the why are we looking at this? One, because I was told to, but two, you know, it creates an opportunity to decide how can we be most ready and agile. And then the will, you know, the question is, where are you guys on kind of your positions for social justice, social change, where within what you can act on, you know, what you want to say about that, or at least get conversations started in that. And so, Jess, and so let me acknowledge, I'm getting close to the 9 o'clock mark. I said I was going to be done. I'll take another comment, but if there's any other quick closing, because I don't want to take your closed session time. Go ahead, Jess.
So real quickly, I think my interest in all of this, and I think moving forward, just to be clear, there was never an interest in not doing anything, or I don't think that, and I know that there's this idea that I guess I just want to be really clear that there was never the intention to not meet the moment or not do what we need to do, or not, I mean, organizations across the country, like you said, Maggie, were putting things out. And I think there was always the intention on, I assume, all of our parts to do that. So I think it's the process issue. It's not about whether we do it or not. So that is number one. And I just wanted to ask about this idea that I think Pam and Amy both referenced a little bit, was about having a smaller group come together and put together a little more. Since we only have an hour, I think personally that would be a good idea, but I'm curious what others think, because I think it would be a way not to, to have a way to give a little more form to this, but then obviously everybody has to have time with it, give input, think it through. But I think that could be a way to maybe get it a little further than it is now. But
Yeah,
I think that's good.
indeed. Yeah, because that matrix, Michael, that you were talking about, I'm a fan of that. Didn't feel like I had the time or the information to go that granular, but I do think there can be some ways to dig into it, lay it out, so you can move it forward.
If you guys are interested in a work group, would you give me a thumbs up, and then I'll ask if you wish to be on it. You can email me and we will put a group together to work on this and maybe bring it back for council retreat or another work session or something. We good for a work group? I see 3, 4, no.
I can just,
Yeah.
I guess my personal opinion is I would like maybe another, since we only spent an hour on it today, I think I would prefer if there were at least one more round of full council discussion before we went to a smaller work group. Because I think if there is a smaller work group, it will be important for those folks to really have a good understanding of what the Border Council thinks. And I don't think, and given, that this is still percolating, we just got, it's a I mean, for us, an hour isn't all that long, but that's another issue. So I think that, I would prefer that we have an opportunity to discuss it in the whole before we break into a smaller group, but that's just one person's preference.
All right.
Could we have another facilitated session?
We can check into that and we can figure that out, and you can have more time to look at the matrix that's already out there. We'll work with that. We'll figure it out.
Alan, you were jumping in?
Yeah, no, I agree with Michael's approach there. I think we've got a bit more to flesh out before, moving on to another stage.
Yeah. So Pam, from my perspective, if I were given some support for setting up kind of the matrix concept, Michael, that you were talking about, I can also do some move ideas through so everybody can add in and we kind of grow and develop something that we can bring forward before it's an official sit-down committee. So if there's a way I can be in service that way, I'm happy to do that, and certainly offer any facilitation for really let's move along here. And I love the whole notion how to be light and streamlined, but really, really effective to the important values you guys hold.
Sounds good. Okay.
So I'll wait to hear from you for next steps, and I'll go ahead and sign off, leave you to your closed session. I do appreciate the chance to see you guys tonight, and I hope I can keep your process moving in a way that works for everybody.
Okay.
All righty.
I'm going to allow for a couple of minutes, a few minutes for public comment. If there's anyone wishing to speak, you can do the raise the hand feature to indicate that you're interested in speaking. I don't think we have a whole lot of people left on, but we can find out. And Michael, if you can help figure that out with us.
Yeah, there is nobody with a raised hand among the attendees.
Okay.
We don't have very many attendees, so I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Okay.
I will confess I have not been monitoring the chat or something like that, but
I was in there, so we're good.
Technically, your work sessions, you say you don't have feedback.
We let people comment at the end of the meeting.
So I'm not seeing anything.
Great. And again, folks can always reach us by email or phone as well. Our next full council meeting will be next week, Wednesday, the 28th, I believe. Is that the date right? Yes, Wednesday the 28th. So that'll be our regular council meeting. So council members, this is the end of our work session. Thank you, Maggie, for working with us and all
Welcome.
the information. Appreciate it. Council members, you will log off this meeting and join the closed session meeting. I have to be the last one out, so see you there.